do you trust Vladimir Putin?
Well, I trust him more than I trust Keir Starmer.
Really?
Yeah.
You trust Vladimir Putin?
I trust him more
than Keir Starmer?
You should be apologetic. I think it's the worst kind of politics of envy. I think it is a war on aspiration. I like the way that question was phrased. And it shows a total lack of knowledge.
Britain in chaos, Piers Morgan tears apart Starmer's utter failure as a leader. What do you make of the state of the UK at the moment? Is it a proud, thriving nation, or a country stuck in a loop of endless decline? If you listen to Piers Morgan, the answer is obvious. The UK is in crisis, and the man holding the wheel, Sir Keir Starmer, might just be steering straight into an iceberg. From immigration to political mediocrity, economic woes to the great culture war, Morgan has plenty to say, and he's not holding back. But is he simply speaking truth to power, or has he turned outrage into a full-time performance? Let's dive deep into Piers Morgan's relentless rhetoric on the UK, Keir Starmer, and everything in between.
I believe that Labour, like the socialist parties in Canada, is absolutely overwhelmed by the diversity, equity, and inclusivity, victimizer narrative types. And that even if Starmer himself has any sense, which I doubt, the probability that his minions will lay waste to the UK it's certain in my estimation.
Morgan's style is nothing short of a verbal hurricane. He doesn't just criticize, he eviscerates. Whether it's on his show, his columns, or social media, his words are sharp, loud, and impossible to ignore. The UK, according to Morgan, has become a nation of dysfunction, where public services are crumbling, the economy is faltering, and the political class is made up of spineless bureaucrats more interested in platitudes than solutions. And at the center of it all? Keir Starmer, the man who, in Morgan's eyes, has the leadership skills of a wet sponge.
He's reportedly briefed his top team to avoid talking about social issues, woke issues, because apparently the public doesn't care about them. He couldn't be more wrong. The public does care, and with good reason.
To understand Morgan's critique, start with the one issue he never stops talking about: immigration. He argues that Britain has lost control of its borders, allowing an unsustainable number of migrants into the country while public services buckle under the weight. The infamous small boats crisis? A symptom of what he sees as political cowardice. Morgan has repeatedly mocked both the Tories and Labour for failing to tackle illegal migration, but he saves his harshest words for Starmer's recent stance. The Labour leader once spoke of open borders as if they were a Tory disaster, but now, suddenly, he's taking a tough stance. Convenient, isn't it? Morgan sees this as yet another example of political flip-flopping, Starmer shifting his position whenever public sentiment demands it.
You would trust Vladimir Putin more than Keir Starmer?
I wouldn't trust any of them.
But immigration is just one piece of the puzzle. Morgan is obsessed with the bigger picture, the overall decline of Britain. He paints a picture of a country that used to stand tall but now merely exists, a ghost of its former self. Public services, he claims, are in rapid decay. The NHS is in constant crisis, crime rates are up, and basic infrastructure is failing. Meanwhile, politicians continue to engage in theatrical debates, all while nothing actually gets done. The UK, in his words, is a nation in a slow-motion car crash, and its leaders are just squabbling over the music on the radio.
What do you think's on the table for the UK for the next 4 years?
Well, I've interviewed Starmer a few times.
Yeah.
I did him for my Life Story show, which is like a 2.5-hour interview. And I think, probably like you probably believe, that if you interview someone for 2.5 hours, they can't hide the entire time.
Yeah.
You're going to work out really what they're like. I think he's fundamentally a decent guy.
Yeah.
I think he's a kind of regular guy. There's nothing particularly flamboyant or special about him. He's a self-made man. He had a very tough upbringing. His mother was very ill for a very long period of time, and he effectively was her carer a lot of the time.
Then there's the question of Starmer's political courage, or, in Morgan's view, the absolute lack of it. If Morgan is to be believed, Starmer is the human embodiment of political hesitation. He rarely takes a firm stance on anything until he's sure it won't backfire. One day, he's pandering to progressives, the next, he's trying to sound like Nigel Farage-like to appease frustrated voters. Morgan finds this brand of politics nauseating. He craves leaders who stand for something, who take bold, sometimes unpopular, stances. Instead, he sees Starmer as a man who looks at the polls before deciding what his opinion should be.
It means Western society is being policed by a radical minority of people,
with ultra-progressive views that would seem completely insane at most family dinner tables. It means people are abused, shamed and vilified, sometimes hounded out of their jobs for expressing a dissenting opinion. It means our heritage and our culture are being constantly ransacked, from Roald Dahl's books to the James Bond novels, to avoid offending an imaginary cult.
Of course, no Piers Morgan rant would be complete without a healthy dose of culture war rhetoric. He views Britain's current political climate as a battleground between common sense and woke insanity. The country, he believes, is suffocating under the weight of identity politics, virtue signalling, and an increasing intolerance for free speech. If you dare to question the wisdom of gender ideology, you're a transphobe. If you raise concerns about mass immigration, you're a racist. Morgan is tired of it, and he's made it his mission to expose what he sees as the hypocrisy of the modern left. Starmer, in Morgan's view, is deeply complicit in this cultural mess. He has failed, Morgan argues, to push back against the extremes within his own party. Whether it's Labour's stance on gender issues or its cautious approach to law and order, Morgan sees Starmer as someone who lacks the backbone to call out the lunacy when it matters most. And for Morgan, the ultimate sin of any politician is cowardice. He respects conviction even when he disagrees with it. But Starmer? Morgan sees a man who doesn't want to offend anyone, and in trying to please everyone, he pleases no one.
Even if Starmer himself has any sense, which I doubt, the probability that his minions will lay waste to the UK it's certain in my estimation.
The economy is another favourite target. Morgan sees Britain's economic struggles as a direct result of weak leadership. Inflation, rising taxes, a cost of living crisis, these are the symptoms of a government that has lost touch with its people. Starmer claims he has a plan to fix things, but Morgan remains unconvinced. Labour's economic strategy, in his view, is vague at best and disastrous at worst. He's skeptical of Starmer's ability to manage a nation that is already financially strained, especially when many of his policies sound suspiciously like reheated ideas from failed past governments.
It means we're smeared as transphobic for thinking it's stark raving mad that a male rapist can identify as a woman to get a place in a woman's prison. And above all, it means the rest of us are made to feel like extremists for saying, well, hang on a second, this isn't right. I don't want to live in this world. If you question it, you are the problem. You are the bad person. You must be cancelled.
And then there's the Nigel Farage factor. If Morgan had to choose between Starmer and Farage in a political boxing match, he'd probably bet on Farage delivering a knockout in round one. Morgan has often spoken about how Farage's views, once seen as extreme, are now widely accepted. The man who was ridiculed for his Brexit stance is now increasingly seen as a prophet on immigration and national sovereignty. Morgan believes that if Starmer continues down his current path, he might just push more voters into Farage's arms, setting the stage for an unexpected political upheaval.
What's that percentage again? How many women have penises again? Sakir? So far this year, I've interviewed the Prime Ministers of Britain, Israel, Australia. I went to the Ukraine to interview President Zelensky. I interviewed former US President Donald Trump. I've interviewed other US presidential candidates for 2024. The one person I've not interviewed is Keir Starmer.
Piers Morgan thrives on controversy, and his takedown of the UK's political state is no exception. He doesn't just criticise Starmer, he mocks him, dismantles him, and exposes what he sees as his glaring weaknesses. But Morgan is also an equal opportunity critic. He's been just as brutal towards the Conservative Party, calling out their failures and incompetence. In his eyes, the problem isn't just Starmer, it's the entire political class. Britain is being run by career politicians who lack real-world experience, insulated elites who have no idea what ordinary people are going through.
One of the richest and smartest men in the history of this planet says that something's literally threatening civilization. We should probably not just dismiss it. It's very easy to dismiss this stuff as culture wars, diversionary tactics used by politicians, so we get mad about society instead of their mismanagement. And there is something to that, I get it. But make no mistake, this woke virus is real and it ruins people's lives.
So where does all of this leave us? Morgan's relentless attacks on the UK's leadership paint a grim picture. He sees a nation struggling to find its identity, a government unable to make tough decisions, and a public growing more disillusioned by the day. But the question remains, does he offer solutions or just endless outrage? Piers Morgan has made it his personal mission to dissect the dysfunction of British politics with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. And honestly, who could blame him? The state of the UK government is like a sinking ship, except instead of bailing out water, the politicians are arguing over who should hold the bucket. Morgan, never one to shy away from controversy, has torn into Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, and every other major political figure, questioning their competence, their policies, and sometimes even their ability to form a coherent sentence.
I am absolutely with you and the millions of people who think this bloke is a disgrace. He has no plan, he has no conviction, he has no backbone. I don't buy this government at all. It makes me furious.
The problem, as Morgan sees it, isn't just that the country is struggling, it's that no one seems to have a clue what to do about it. Starmer, who once positioned himself as the steady alternative to the Conservative chaos, now finds himself in a whirlwind of contradictions, U-turns, and strategic blunders. Meanwhile, the Conservatives look less like a ruling party and more like a group project where no one did the reading. Morgan thrives in this environment, delivering his signature mix of scathing criticism, theatrical outrage, and the occasional moment of genuine insight. But is his rhetoric just noise, or does he have a point? The public services are failing, immigration policies are all over the place, and the economy seems to be held together with duct tape and wishful thinking. The UK, once a global powerhouse, now feels more like a country waiting for someone, anyone, to take charge. Morgan's biggest frustration? No one in power seems capable of stepping up.
That those involved will feel the full force of the law. So we coordinated, we went through some of the numbers. Over 400 people now have been arrested, 100 have been charged, some in relation to online activity, and a number of them are already in court. And I'm now expecting substantive sentencing before the end of this week.
One of the most baffling things about Keir Starmer is that no one seems to know what he actually stands for, including, at times, Starmer himself. His leadership has been an endless cycle of saying one thing, doing another, and then acting surprised when people call him out on it. Morgan, with his usual no-nonsense approach, has made it clear that Starmer's biggest weakness isn't his policies, it's his inability to take a firm stance on anything. Take immigration, for example. Starmer went from criticising the Tories' open border approach to suddenly blaming them for being too lenient, as if he hadn't spent years avoiding the topic altogether. The public, already exhausted by political double talk, now has a leader who seems to be playing a never-ending game of Twister with his own principles. Morgan has repeatedly pointed out that, while Starmer talks a big game about leadership, he's yet to prove he has the backbone to actually lead.
One of the most popular politicians in the country. That's why millions of people voted for him and his party at the last election. It's not their fault that the voting system doesn't reflect that in terms of the number of MPs. Nigel Farage is always going to be a much more exciting, interesting, dynamic, charismatic, bright, engaging, and yes, divisive figure than Keir Starmer. I mean, I know who I'd choose to have dinner with.
Then there's the issue of the Labour Party itself. Starmer inherited a mess, no doubt, but his strategy for cleaning it up has been less about strong leadership and more about distancing himself from anyone remotely controversial. The problem? That approach makes him look weak. Morgan's brutal assessment is that Starmer is so terrified of upsetting people that he's ended up standing for nothing at all. And in a political climate where people are desperate for decisive leadership, that's a fatal flaw. If there's one thing that Piers Morgan loves more than exposing political hypocrisy, it's taking on what he calls woke nonsense. And in the UK, there's no shortage of it. Whether it's cancel culture, gender debates, or the bizarre contradictions of modern progressivism, Morgan has made it his personal mission to push back against the movement that he believes is ruining common sense.
Those are two of the aspects of the woke mind virus that I think are very dangerous. Is that it's often anti-meritocratic. You can't question things. Even the questioning is bad.
The problem, as he sees it, is that too many politicians, including Starmer, are afraid to push back. The fear of being labelled offensive, insensitive, or out of touch has led to an era of self-censorship where no one is willing to say what they actually think. Morgan has called out this trend repeatedly, arguing that the UK is becoming a country where stating obvious facts can get you branded a bigot.
Having to hesitate before using perfectly normal words like woman or bonkers or mother because they've been browbeaten into thinking it'll cause offence. It means biological males can destroy women in sport and gender categories are being abolished at award ceremonies, resulting, as we saw at the Brits, in no women getting nominated at all.
This isn't just a cultural debate, it's a political issue. Starmer and his party have tried to toe the line between progressivism and pragmatism, but in doing so, they've alienated both sides. The left thinks he isn't radical enough, while the right sees him as another out-of-touch politician bowing to social justice warriors. Morgan's verdict? If Starmer wants to lead, he needs to stop pandering and start standing up for common sense. Nigel Farage has always been a controversial figure, but in recent years, he's gone from a fringe politician to a serious contender for real political power. Morgan has frequently compared Farage to Donald Trump, and while the two men have different styles, the parallels are impossible to ignore. Both thrive on controversy, both have a knack for connecting with working-class voters, and both have been dismissed by the political elite only to come back stronger. For now, Morgan continues to dominate the conversation, tearing into Starmer with the energy of a man who thrives on political chaos. His rhetoric is sharp, unforgiving, and, let's be honest, entertaining. Whether you agree with him or not, you can't ignore him. And maybe that's the whole point. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Piers Morgan's no-holds-barred take on the UK and Keir Starmer, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. What do you think? Is he right about Britain's decline, or is he just another voice in the never-ending political circus? Let us know below.